Last week, we tackled important films to study from a storytelling and world-building perspective. Those genres included the hero's journey, unreliable narrators, action, comedy, and drama. This week, we're going to saddle up and discuss horror, sci-fi, fantasy, romance, and this beautiful blend of genre-defying films that are really hard to categorize. Before we get into that, though, I need you to look below. That like and subscribe, they've been talking about you behind your back. You should probably head down there and slap them, teach them a lesson. Hey, threatening intro. Kind of weird. So, a few caveats if you didn't see last week's episode. First, I've only allowed myself 3 films per genre so that we're not here all day while you listen to me info dump about films. Trust me, it's better this way. I'd never shut up about it. Second, this is not a list of the greatest films in the genre. There are plenty of top 20s and rank lists to argue about on other channels. This list is specifically with an eye toward learning certain techniques and studying the greats. These choices are specific in that they're not just great stories, but they teach us how to be great at writing in the genre. With that said, let's kick things off with horror. For that, I'm going to present 3 films: Psycho, Hellraiser, and Night of the Living Dead. What is crazy is that they've all had remakes over the years, and only Hellraiser's remake is a dumpster fire. The remake of Psycho and Night of the Living Dead seek to update the originals while showing what made them great, and in that regard, they're very enjoyable, even if they're not as good as the originals. So, for Psycho, this is a film that is almost chokingly claustrophobic. Scenes are often with only 1 or 2 characters, yet the rest of the atmosphere is filled with tension. The story takes some daring challenges, not the least of which is the death of the main character at the halfway mark of the film. Study this film for a lesson in doing the absolute most with less. There are only 4 major sets, a cast of less than 10, and instead of a slasher bloodbath, even a single murder in this movie is shocking and unexpected. This film is a masterpiece for everything it does, everything it says, and everything it doesn't say. I still catch myself watching it whenever I see it's on. Now, for Hellraiser, we're doing a lot of the same things that we're doing with Psycho. That is, a small cast, few sets, minimal and shocking deaths. What this film does different, and why we study it, is that the primary plot is about a woman hunting men to feed her dead lover. The subplot blows wide open to world-building this hellscape on the other side of our world, where demons of pain come to collect the soul of the man that escaped them. Based on the novella The Hellbound Heart, which itself is a masterpiece despite how brief it is, Clive Barker packs so much world-building and memorable characters into what amounts to a subplot. It was inevitable that this was going to spawn a multitude of sequels. Now, Night of the Living Dead does something totally different that's worth studying. With a cast of strangers that are forced into the same house to hide from an outbreak of zombies, it's doing this feint. The primary story should be the walking dead outside the windows, but the real drama is inside the house with our survivors. One of our main characters, Ben, is obviously a natural leader, taking charge of the situation and trying to formulate a plan to help keep them safe, while Harry is a contrarian and he's convinced he knows better. As these two butt heads where Ben appears to be clearly right, they're putting the lives of everyone on the line. I have to be honest, I watched this film like a few months ago for like the millionth time, and it just blows me away how a black and white film made by an amateur still holds up almost 60 years later. Plus, George Romero basically created the zombie genre right here in this film, so you're studying history, technique, world building, and the subtle messaging and metaphor about social anxiety and the dangers of complacency. Now, we're going to jump over, but not too far from our friends in horror. Let's talk about science fiction. There are countless worlds and stories created within this genre that vary from close to our own to completely alien worlds in a far-flung future. Truthfully, I would make an entire list of what to watch and study just out of Star Trek episodes. And so many great science fiction writers over the decade use Star Trek as a playground to tell groundbreaking stories in an already established universe. But we're talking about films here, where the universe was created from the ground up. So let's discuss why I chose RoboCop, Blade Runner, and 12 Monkeys. RoboCop, in every single thing it does, dials it up by like 1. Not huge, just a hyper reality of our own. The news is 1 degree too bleak. The OCP Corporation is 1 degree too powerful. Crime is 1 degree too rampant. And the movie's violence is 1 degree more violent than anything you could have watched at the time. In fact, the director's cut includes full scenes that had to be edited back in 1987 just to get it down to an R rating. Why study this if it's over the top in everything it does? Consistency. The world of RoboCop is dialed up, yes, but that's across the board. Nothing sticks out or seems out of place in this world where an evil corporation can take a dead man and bring him back as a cyborg. It gets into heavy questions about identity and self, and asks questions about crime and punishment. Again, almost 40 years later, and this film is asking questions that are relevant today. Universal truths we should always be asking ourselves. But it doesn't beat you over the head. It entertains first and lets you ask questions when the credits roll. Next up, we have Blade Runner. What can I say about the writings of Philip K. Dick that I haven't said a billion times on this channel already? What do you study watching this film? I mean, what don't you study? Look at this futuristic world of 2019. Alright, the year might be a little off, but in this dystopian future, we've unloaded humanity of the business of mining, off-world drilling, and war. We leave that to the replicants, androids we've created out of organic components. What happens when they want to be free? What happens when they begin to value their own lives? What does it mean to be alive? This movie is a masterpiece in filmmaking, world building, and storytelling. It asks questions that are so morally gray that you have to wonder if the bad guy is really a bad guy at all. When he delivers a monologue at the end of the movie, it is so jaw-dropping that you have to question everything. This is how you write morally gray characters. On the other hand, watching 12 Monkeys is not immediately obvious. The story really feels disjointed at times, as Bruce Willis's character may have been sent back in time from a doomed future to stop a pandemic, but he also might be insane. Couple that with a subplot of these haunting memories he has from childhood, and you start to wonder if any of this will ever make sense. Then the ending shows you the master plan, letting you see the big picture in a way that connects every thread in the story and answers every question. This is peak suspense in science fiction, trying to make sense out of 1,000 puzzle pieces scattered about. We study this film for a few reasons. One, I know I have my pantsers out there writing down whatever feels good in the moment. But the truth is, a story like this takes the kind and level of planning and forethought that even the best of us would struggle with. To have every interlocking piece of this story come together in the 10 minutes before the film ends was a stroke of writing genius that we could only hope to capture. The other big reason to study this film is it does the absolute bare minimum of world building this dystopian future. It only shows you enough to tell the story and absolutely nothing else. It doesn't take 5 minutes of exposition to explain their time travel abilities or the world that they live in. It's just enough to say that they have the ability, and the world was devastated. They needed to send someone back to stop it, and Bruce Willis is who they chose this time. You'll notice a recurring theme with a lot of my recommendations today. I suggest a lot of worlds that are really light on world building, and only let us peek at their much larger worlds. The reason for that, especially if you've been following my videos for a while, is because I know people like us. If you love world building as much as I do, then you probably have notebooks, maps, just pages upon pages of content relating to your world. Do you remember when I said the biggest takeaway was in the episode, how much world building ends up in your story? The answer was only as much as you need to tell the story. These films are a constant reminder of that. Everyone wants lore and canon these days, even if there's no good story beneath it. Yes, Yoda was a wise and ancient teacher, but that doesn't mean we need to see Yoda the early years, where he attended the Jedi Academy and decided his favorite lightsaber color was green. What if there was nothing memorable to tell? What if Yoda was just another Jedi Council member until episodes 1 through 6 happened? What if this last part of his life was the only one that mattered? If it wasn't the most interesting part, then why aren't you telling that story? You see, it cuts both ways. Now, let's get into some lovey-dovey squishy stuff. That's right, I'm talking about romance. So for that, we're discussing Titanic, Dirty Dancing, and William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Good God, that's a weird mix, right? And why? Look, I won't pretend to be a huge fan of the genre, but each one of these films is a great study, a great watch, and a great movie. Let's start with a giant iceberg in the room. Titanic takes a simple story, weaves in a historical disaster, and somehow manages to get me and every other guy I knew in high school taking his girlfriend to see a 3-hour movie multiple times. What do we study? Look, Jack and Rose had the start of a weekend to get to know each other and fall in love. You know what is baffling? You never notice that while you're watching the movie. They don't get to know each other very well, but the natural chemistry and interplay between these characters makes it seem like they were meant for each other. The last half of the movie, the spectacle of watching the Titanic sink and doom half the people on it, would just be a documentary if it wasn't for the fact that there are two very real characters to care about and root for. Sometimes when you think about the reality of Titanic on paper, it makes no sense, and then you watch it and you're like, never let go! There's something truly magical about making two fictional characters feel something and have the audience feel it too. Dirty Dancing does something similar, in that it's set in the 1960s. It tells a simple story of falling in love over a very brief period of time. It even uses the guy from the wrong side of the tracks and the rich girl with the bright future cliche, and yet it absolutely never feels out of place. It does world building with this underground style of dance, this Dirty Dancing, and it turns from a niche interest to this forbidden world our female lead not only wants to be a part of, but she might be the queen. I don't know what to call this, the way it made this interest that they shared into a world itself. Worldifying? I don't know. All I can say is watch it, study it, and understand why it works. Lastly, William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Why? Out of all the things, why would I recommend not only Shakespeare, but Shakespeare set in the modern era? Because there is a huge lesson here. Setting neither makes nor breaks your world if the story is strong enough to stand on its own. Updating this take of the classic story to the modern era didn't require any dramatic script changes, quite the opposite. It made a young master of kung fu and friendship watch a performance of Shakespeare, something my teachers tried to make me do kicking and screaming, and I was now paying money to go to a theater and witness. It is stylish, it makes interesting use of the material, and still uses the original language. Study this film and understand what is possible when you have a strong story with universal truths. Could you pick it up and put it in another country, another era, another time altogether, and would it still be a strong story? So we already talked about sci-fi, but what about its cousin, fantasy? Well, don't think I forgot that. We're looking at some of the most quintessential fantasy ever made here. Willow, Interview with the Vampire, and Conan the Barbarian. Willow was high fantasy before high fantasy knew what it was. The storyline rides the border of swords and sorcery and a fairy tale, and as a lot of early fantasy films often do, but our main character is a dwarven farmer that dreams of being a powerful sorcerer. We're not trying to tell the human-centric side of the story. As a matter of fact, the human is almost a sidekick, although for a sidekick, Mad Mardigan is over-the-top levels of badass, so there's that. The movie is simple, charming, and only gives you enough world building as it needs to tell the story. Nothing less, nothing more. Interview with the Vampire does the exact opposite. As it is the tale that Louis is telling a journalist, it wants to steep you neck deep in its world and keep you there. Being in this underground world within our own, we learn their customs, rules, their laws, and eventually their cruelty and the curse of immortality. We study this film for the obvious reason. It thrusts us into a fully realized alternate world and keeps us there the whole movie, all the while telling the life story of one particularly interesting vampire and what he's come to learn over the past 200 years. It's fascinating stuff. Leaving us with Conan. Why Conan the Barbarian? Doesn't that movie star Arnold Schwarzenegger before he even learned how to act? Yeah, that's exactly the point. Conan has extremely sparse dialogue. The whole film is narratively driven, and in that regard it does the same job as Interview with the Vampire. It submerges you in Conan's world and tells a story of a great champion, Conan, without a whole lot of dialogue and even less exposition. We study this because it's so realized and brazen, like, yeah, here's the world, now watch what the story does. And it just executes that perfectly. So, don't look down your nose at Conan. On the high fantasy level, it's actually up there with Lord of the Rings. Now, today I'm going to wrap up with 3 films that I feel are so great and so important for one specific reason. They flatly refuse to be identified with any one particular genre. At any given time, when people make best of lists for movies, the number of different genres that want to claim these films is astonishing. I've literally modeled my own writing career on this very ethos, whether we're talking about the high fantasy, comedy, action of the Wicked Instruments, or the time travel, thriller, action, romance, the Incursion trilogy. I want to write the stories that feel good to me, not the genre stories that feel good. I don't like confining myself to a box, and you shouldn't either. I hope these movies can show you that new world of possibilities. We're talking about The Princess Bride, Big Trouble in Little China, and Better Off Dead. So, first off, if you only watch one film on this entire list today, it should be The Princess Bride. It's light on world building, again only giving you enough to tell the story. It has a large cast of characters that are each memorable and have a voice all their own, and it refuses to be pinned down. Fantasy? Gotcha. Swords and sorcery? All the time. Actions and thrills? Yup. Romance? Come on. This is one of the most charming romances ever told. One part fairy tale, one part high fantasy. There's pirates and Spanish sword masters and evil princes and rodents of unusual size. This is one of those films where every single time I watch it again, I find something new to marvel at for what it does in its storytelling. Even if you've seen it before, consider this your reminder to go watch it again. Now, let's talk about Big Trouble in Little China. This is one of those films that is made even more interesting when you read about what was going on behind the scenes in the writing process. Originally, our main character, Jack Burton, was a sidekick. Kurt Russell's natural charisma in the role made keeping him off to the side absolutely impossible. This movie was also supposed to originally be a Western meets Chinese mysticism, where Jack Burton was a cowboy trying to get his horse back, not his truck. This goes back to the lesson I mentioned earlier that setting doesn't matter if the story's right. What we ended up with, however, is a comedy, action, romance, fantasy thriller with horror elements about what 2 men are going to do to save the woman that they love from an ancient Chinese sorcerer. What are we learning from this? Jeez. I don't even know where to begin. Comedic timing, how to do urban fantasy the right way. How about having a rough and tumble braggart with more charisma than brains as your main character? How to seamlessly blend 2 gigantically different cultures in a single cohesive story. It is unbelievable just how much this movie gets right. Is it an Oscar contender? Of course not. Is it more entertaining than the 1986 Oscar winner Out of Africa? Well, I'll put it this way. I saw Out of Africa once. I've seen Big Trouble in Little China more times than I can count. And that leaves us with my final recommendation, Better Off Dead. I'm not sure how to explain this movie other than to say just watch it. You'll get it. It's a comedy / 80s sports movie / romance with some animated elements. I would say it leans more into the comedy than The Princess Bride, and more into the romance than Big Trouble in Little China. So, it's a very silly teen movie, complete with these animated elements as our main character's doodles make his imagination run away with him. And then it's also got this sports element. The jokes are still funny to this day, the sports still makes you cheer, and the romance is adorable. We study this and we wonder, how does something so goofy and silly work so well? There isn't a single bizarre thing that happens in this movie where anyone asks what the heck is going on. Everyone just kind of accepts it and moves on, which only adds to the comedy. But it also does reinforce a point I made a couple weeks ago about the substance. You can have a silly world where silly things happen, but the whole world has to be a part of it. Otherwise, it sticks out like a sore thumb. This is what I mean. The whole world of Better Off Dead is insane, and we're just along for the ride. But DC, more than half your movies are over 20 years old. Well, guy that talks to your screen, I'm glad you mentioned that. You might have heard the phrase standing on the shoulders of giants before, and it's quite apt for this list. I'll put it to you this way. Which would you rather? Would you rather watch a film and take notes from a movie that was made today by someone who was inspired by a 2014 film, which of itself was inspired by a film from 1999, which of itself was a remake of a 1960 movie? Or would you rather just go straight to the source? These writers of speculative fiction thought it was an insult to call them science fiction authors. They were just authors. They were coming up with original ideas that are still relevant stories today and aren't strictly reflective of a current moment in time, but speak truth to the entire human experience. If you gave me a choice, I'd go with the classics every single time. That isn't to say that great films aren't still being made, but truly, let's be honest, they're few and far between. So, go and check these films out and let them open your eyes to a world of possibilities for you as a storyteller, and then go make us something we've never seen before. I really hope some people found these lists useful. While you may have already seen some of these films, or don't feel like you need to see things in genres you don't write in, I'd still say give them a chance anyway. You never know when you might want to cross a line and incorporate elements of another genre like romance or comedy into your writing. Being well-rounded is most definitely a good thing. Don't forget to check out my own author page. The link is in the description below. You'll also find the link to my newsletter in the comments where you can get a free book, read about all my latest projects, and find other indie authors for your next great read. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, have fun and get crafting.